This is a city so ancient that when the pyramids of Egypt were first being built,
It was already a ruin, 2,000 years old.
Pull together now. Heave, lift it higher. Pull together now. Heave, lift it higher.
But the real mystery isn't when Jericho was built. It's why. Why would Stone Age people construct a colossal defensive tower at the lowest point on the planet?
This is a city so ancient that when the pyramids of Egypt were first being built, it was already a ruin, 2,000 years old. We are talking about the oldest continuously inhabited place on Earth, the first city in human history. A fortress raised around 10,000 years before Christ at a time when humanity didn't even know what metal was. But the real mystery isn't when Jericho was built. It's why. Why would Stone Age people construct a colossal defensive tower at the lowest point on the planet? Today, you're about to walk through more than 12,000 years of uninterrupted human history. Welcome to the lowest place on Earth. Literally, we're standing in the Jordan Valley, 270 meters below sea level. The air here is thick, heavy. In summer, the heat turns this valley into an open-air furnace. By all logic, no one should live here. It's a geological scar surrounded by desert, but in the middle of this brown dust, there's a flash of green, a miracle, the spring of Elisha, an oasis pouring out fresh water nonstop for thousands of years. That water drew the first travelers here around 10,000 BC. In a world where survival followed one brutal rule, keep moving or you die. Stop walking, and hunger catches you. But here, at this strange oasis at the bottom of the world, a group known as the Natufians made a decision that violated millions of years of instinct. They looked at the water, they looked at wild wheat, and they stopped. It sounds simple today. It was revolutionary. They built the first mud houses in human history. They solved hunger. And in doing so, they created a problem humanity had never faced before, a fixed target. As nomads, safety came from movement. Now with food stored in one place, they became vulnerable. The first house automatically created the first thief. They traded freedom for permanence, without realizing that permanence would demand something monstrous. Fear didn't make them run. Fear made them dig. Fast forward 2,000 years. To put that in perspective, that's the same amount of time separating us from Jesus Christ. Over those 2 millennia, the Natufians' gamble paid off. The tiny mud village grew into something the world had never seen before, a city. But success bred a new anxiety. If they once feared starvation, now they feared losing what they had accumulated. And to protect it, in a world without laws, they attempted the greatest engineering feat of prehistory. No metal tools, no wheels, no beasts of burden. Using only stone and animal horns, they carved raw rock and raised a massive wall 4 meters high, encircling the entire oasis. But what truly confounds archaeologists isn't the wall, it's what was attached to it. A stone tower, 8.5 meters tall, with a perfectly polished internal staircase. Think about the insanity of that. Millennia before the pyramids, Neolithic humans were building defensive skyscrapers. The question is unavoidable. Defense against what? Kathleen Kenyon, the archaeologist who excavated the site, believed it was military, protection against raiders. But newer studies suggest a more unsettling enemy. The tower stood inside the wall. The wall may not have been built to stop armies, but to stop catastrophic mud floods cascading down from the Judean hills. Jericho may not have been fighting people. It may have been fighting geography itself. And this obsession with permanence didn't stop at the walls. It went inside the houses. Beneath the floors, archaeologists found human skulls, separated from their bodies, coated in plaster to recreate faces, shells placed where eyes once were, buried directly beneath living rooms. To us, it feels macabre. To them, it was ownership. Your ancestors were physically present beneath your feet, watching. A living deed to the land, life and death occupied the same space. Guarded by that towering monument of stone, they believed these defenses would last forever, and in a way they did. The tower still stands, but the world beyond Jericho was changing. Humans were learning to melt rock, to create weapons harder than the human skull. The Stone Age was ending. And Jericho was about to learn that walls built to stop mud were useless against metal. Then came another enemy, hidden, unavoidable. Jericho was built directly atop an unstable geological fault. For centuries, earthquakes shattered the city, collapsing walls, crushing homes. But what followed wasn't abandonment. It was stubbornness. Each time the ground shook, survivors leveled the ruins and rebuilt directly on top of them. Generation after generation, layer upon layer, by 1700 BC, Jericho was no longer at ground level. It had become an artificial hill, a tell, where every meter of height represented a past catastrophe turned into foundation. And as the city climbed upward, it changed hands. By this time, Jericho was a Canaanite city-state, and the world had become far more dangerous. Empires in Egypt and the north were deploying war chariots and battering rams capable of smashing gates. Simple walls were obsolete, so Jericho's engineers turned the hill itself into a weapon. They built what archaeologists call a glacis, a massive earthen ramp surrounding the city's base, coated in ultra-smooth, hardened plaster. Its purpose wasn't beauty, it was physics. To prevent siege engines from ever reaching the walls above, Jericho wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was redefining urban warfare. And what makes this story controversial, even today, is this. Jericho didn't just invent the city, it invented the idea that survival requires isolation, fortification, and domination of land. A lesson humanity has never stopped repeating. Whether that lesson saved us or doomed us is still up for debate. The glacis was engineered with brutal precision. Its surface was so smooth and steep that horses and soldiers would slip, lose balance, and slide helplessly downward, turning into easy targets for archers raining death from above. Inside this elevated fortress, life changed completely. Excavations reveal that the elite felt untouchable behind these defenses. Tombs from this period contain preserved wooden furniture, imported food, and fine pottery. Wealth flowed upward. Jericho controlled the trade routes of the Jordan Valley and taxed every caravan that passed through. This city was designed to be invincible, proof against battering rams, Egyptian chariots, and conventional armies. But this flawless engineering had one fatal flaw. It was built to defeat normal warfare. The city's leaders had no idea that the next force to appear on the horizon wouldn't bring siege machines at all, but a strategy that shattered every rule of war they knew. 300 years passed. The gamble on military engineering appeared to have worked. By 1400 BC, Jericho reached the height of its geopolitical power. It functioned as the gateway to Canaan. Whoever controlled that spring and those passes controlled trade between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Jericho grew rich, cosmopolitan, flooded with exotic goods, fueled by tolls and taxes. But that strategic position also painted a massive target on its back. Across the Jordan River, a migrating mass of Hebrews had encamped, and Jericho was the single real obstacle between them and the land they intended to claim. The king of Jericho knew the danger. His response was total lockdown. Biblical text and historical context describe a complete state of siege. Gates were barred. Trade stopped. No one entered. No one left. The elite placed absolute confidence in their double walls and the slick defensive slope below. They believed hunger and thirst would destroy the invaders long before the walls failed. Jericho had grain reserves and water enough to hold out for months, but no wall can protect a city from internal collapse. While the king scanned the horizon, the city's moral structure was rotting from within. Rahab, a woman who ran an inn and worked as a prostitute, lived literally inside the double wall system. Because she hosted travelers and overheard conversations, she knew something the king refused to face. The people were terrified. The Bible says their hearts had melted in fear. Rahab made a cold, rational survival calculation. She understood that physical fortifications would not withstand the psychological force of the enemy advancing toward them. When 2 Hebrew spies infiltrated the city, proving the security wasn't as perfect as claimed, Rahab made a decision that sealed Jericho's fate. She betrayed her own king. She hid the spies on her roof beneath bundles of flax drying in the sun and deceived the royal guards sent to find them. At the very top of the most secure defense in the ancient world, the city's destiny was quietly signed away. She traded strategic intelligence for the lives of her family. Canaanite engineering could stop battering rams. It had no defense against betrayal. The king expected a frontal assault. He had no idea that Joshua's strategy would defy every military doctrine known to humanity. What happened next still unsettles historians and strategists today. Ancient sieges were loud and violent, rams slamming gates, arrows flying, soldiers screaming to intimidate defenders. Joshua ordered the opposite. Total silence. For 6 consecutive days, the Israelite army marched around the impregnable walls without a single word spoken. Only the sound of footsteps in the sand and the piercing call of 7 rams' horn trumpets echoed through the air. From inside the locked city, watching through narrow slits, this was psychological torture. Silence is a weapon. The king expected impact. He got anticipation. Thousands of invaders circling like predators, not attacking, just waiting. On the 7th day, the tension snapped. After the 7th circuit, silence exploded into a collective shout that, according to the biblical account, made the impossible happen. The walls were not breached. They collapsed straight down. Here is where engineering collides with the supernatural. Brick walls atop earth ramps do not fall this way on their own. Kathleen Kenyon found evidence of red bricks fallen at the base of the slope, forming an accidental ramp that allowed attackers to climb directly into the city. Whether it was a providential earthquake in the seismically active Jordan Valley or a direct miracle, the tactical result was identical. Jericho's perfect defense became its own trap. The city lay open. What followed was perhaps the hardest command for starving the soldiers to obey. The ban. In ancient warfare, plunder was a soldier's pay. Joshua forbade it. Gold, silver, and bronze were placed into the sacred treasury. Everything that breathed was put to the sword. Jericho was not conquered to be ruled, it was destroyed to be a warning. Fire consumed palaces, grain stores, and the luxury of the elite. Smoke rose from the oasis, marking the end of the Canaanite era there. But before leaving, Joshua spoke something more enduring than fire, a curse, a sentence pronounced over anyone who dared rebuild those stones, a curse that would hover over the ruins for 500 years. For 5 centuries, the mound remained untouched. Fear of Joshua's curse outweighed human greed. Travelers detoured. Nomads refused to pitch tents there. But Jericho's geography is irresistible. That spring still poured fresh water into the desert, an economic temptation too powerful to ignore. In the 9th century BC, during the reign of King Ahab, a time of religious defiance and political pragmatism, a man named Hiel from Bethel decided ancient superstition would not stand in the way of profit. He looked at ruins and saw opportunity. He made the fatal mistake of treating a divine sentence as folklore. He ordered the city rebuilt. The biblical account is brief and terrifying. When the first foundation stones were laid, disaster struck immediately. Hiel's firstborn son, Abiram, died. Any superstitious man would have stopped right there, but Hiel didn't. Brick by brick, stone by stone, the construction continued until the final moment when the gates were set into place. That day, his youngest son, Segub, also died. Historians still argue about what truly happened. Were these tragic accidents that fulfilled Joshua's ancient curse? Or, far more disturbing, did Hiel intentionally perform foundation sacrifices, a ritual act rooted in Canaanite and idolatrous culture, offering the lives of his sons to secure the stability of the walls? Archaeology does not dismiss this possibility. Across the region, archaeologists have uncovered jars containing the remains of children buried beneath city foundations, evidence that sacrificing a child to bless a structure was not unthinkable in the ancient mindset. Either way, the price was paid. Jericho stood again, bought with the blood of 2 heirs. But the reborn city was sick. The land became barren. The water caused death, miscarriages, and infertility, as if the ground itself rejected human presence. What a builder broke, only a prophet could repair. Elisha, successor of Elijah, was summoned by desperate inhabitants, and he did something that defied all agricultural logic. He threw salt into the spring. Salt normally kills land. Here, it healed the water. Ironically, the cursed city became home to a school of prophets. Jericho returned to the map, but its reputation was about to transform into something far more seductive. In the centuries that followed, austere prophets were pushed out, replaced by kings who came not seeking holiness, but pleasure. Jump to 30 BC. You wouldn't recognize Jericho. The cursed city was gone. In its place rose something closer to ancient Las Vegas, a city engineered to satisfy the most expensive appetites of Roman and Jewish elites. What was once a military liability became real estate gold. Jerusalem froze in winter rain up in the hills. Jericho, deep in the valley, stayed warm year-round. The aristocracy realized they could turn the oasis into a winter resort, a playground of excess. Politics here were as heated as the climate. Mark Antony gifted the entire city to his lover, Cleopatra of Egypt, who coveted its balsam plantations for perfume production. Herod the Great, self-styled king, was forced to swallow his pride and lease his own city back from an Egyptian queen. After Cleopatra's death, Herod reclaimed control and launched a manic building campaign. He diverted oasis water to create Olympic-sized pools, hippodromes for chariot races, and winter palaces with imported mosaic floors. The contrast was obscene. While common Judeans suffered under crushing taxes and rigid religious laws, the elite of Jericho lounged in heated pools, watching Roman-style theater. But luxury and violence lived side by side. Historian Josephus records that Herod used those same pools to drown the high priest Aristobulus, his own brother-in-law, masking murder as a swimming accident. Pleasure and blood shared the same water. Herod's golden age ended as grotesquely as it was lived. He fell gravely ill in Jericho. The man who built harbors, palaces, and the Temple of Jerusalem died rotting alive, consumed by gangrene, surrounded by the stench of his own flesh and the fear of his subjects. He tried to heal himself in Jericho's thermal waters. The land showed no mercy. Herod died in the city he reshaped, proving that not all the gold of Rome can buy one more day of life. Soon, Jericho would receive a very different visitor, not one who built pools, but one who dismantled invisible walls. About 60 years later, Jericho was still a winter paradise, but now under Roman occupation. It had become a financial hub, a customs checkpoint where balsam and goods crossing the Jordan were heavily taxed. Into this city of money and power walked a man just passing through, on his way to Jerusalem. Jesus of Nazareth. He entered a city divided not by stone walls, but by something far harder to break: social hatred. On one side of the road sat Bartimaeus, a blind beggar screaming for mercy while the crowd tried to silence him. On the other side stood Zacchaeus, not just rich but chief tax collector, a collaborator with Rome, a man who extorted his own people. He had a king's wealth and a leper's social status. In the lowest city on earth, a moral inversion was about to occur. Blocked by hatred and his own short stature, Zacchaeus did something unthinkable for a man of his rank. He ran ahead and climbed a tree. Zacchaeus climbed a wild fig tree, an ordinary tree with low branches. Seeing a wealthy man hanging from a tree like a child was humiliating, but his desperation to see this prophet outweighed every shred of public dignity he had left. Then the moment came. Jesus stopped beneath the tree. The crowd expected judgment. Instead, Jesus issued an invitation to dinner. By entering the house of a tax collector, Jesus shattered the invisible wall separating saints from sinners, and the impact was immediate, measurable, and financial. Zacchaeus promised to repay 4 times what he had stolen, far beyond what Roman or Jewish law required. That afternoon, Jericho witnessed a different kind of conquest. Joshua had brought down physical walls with war cries and destruction. Jesus brought down moral walls with a meal invitation, transforming a traitor into a benefactor. But while theology reshaped hearts, politics remained ruthless. Jericho would soon change hands again. Tax gold would be replaced by a sweeter kind of wealth, one that would turn the city into an industrial machine. Over the next 600 years, Jericho reinvented itself once more. In the Middle Ages, you wouldn't hear trumpets or see Roman pools. The valley echoed instead with the grinding thunder of millstones. Religion shifted with power. Byzantine churches rose over ancient synagogues. Then Islamic minarets climbed beside them when the caliphates took control. But everyone agreed on one thing: that miraculous water wasn't just for drinking, it was for profit. The real revolution was industrial. When European crusaders arrived, armed with swords and an insatiable hunger for wealth, they realized something crucial. The valley's suffocating heat, combined with abundant water, created the perfect greenhouse for an exotic crop: sugarcane. Jericho became the epicenter of medieval white gold. Complex hydraulic systems were built: aqueducts, gravity-powered mills, boiling vats. The sacred city turned into an open-air factory, exporting sweetness to a Europe that still sweetened food with honey. Wealth attracted predators. Mamluks from Egypt and Mongol invaders saw those sugar mills not as farms, but as war financing. Conflict was no longer about breaching walls. It was about burning infrastructure so no one could profit. Scorched earth tactics followed. Mills were destroyed, irrigation canals clogged, copper boilers looted. The collapse was total. Without constant maintenance, the oasis shrank. Jericho, the medieval sugar capital, regressed. Stone structures were dismantled into mud houses. The population dwindled into a forgotten village, erased from global maps. Desert sand slowly buried Herod's palaces, Joshua's walls, and crusader factories, entombing 10,000 years of history beneath silent dunes. Today, Jericho lives a paradox that shocks unprepared visitors. Descending from Jerusalem, you enter a city suspended between tourism and military tension. On one side, air-conditioned buses unload crowds eager to see Zacchaeus' tree in the Mount of Temptation. On the other, checkpoints and red warning signs announce Palestinian Authority territory. Jericho isn't just an open-air museum. It's a geopolitical fault line. Even after 10 millennia, control of this oasis is still contested. The modern challenge is no longer invasion, but expansion. Jericho needs schools, markets, housing. But how do you build when the ground beneath your feet is irreplaceable heritage? UNESCO's listing of Tel Sultan as a World Heritage Site is a cultural victory and a logistical nightmare. Every modern foundation risks destroying an unread chapter of human history. It's a silent conflict. Mud brick ruins demand preservation. Living people demand space. It's a battle between the memory of the dead and the needs of the living. But step back and the tension fades. Jericho's real lesson is terrifying resilience. Egyptians, Canaanites, Israelites, Romans, Byzantines, Mamluks, Ottomans, British, all marched through here, all taxed, ruled, raised flags, and believed they would own this land forever, all vanished. Their empires turned to dust and museum displays. Jericho remained. She watched world powers rise and collapse while drinking from the same spring Elisha healed. Walls usually divide peoples, but Jericho, with its 10,000-year biography, unites our shared past. She reminds us of a brutal truth. We are all temporary tenants of history. The lowest city on earth remains, ironically, one of the highest expressions of human endurance. Empires pass, borders shift, but the city of palms endures. Click on screen now to watch the true story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where archaeology uncovered something even more unsettling.